Hello and welcome back Around the Bonfire. It is the show reminding you that the United States men's national team cannot win without a Berhalter involved. That's just the rules. I don't make them. I'm just here to tell you about them. It's a very exciting Sunday here as we are getting ready for two Chicago Fire matches in a mere matter of 4 days. We're only going to talk about the first one today, though. And as always, joined by two of the best around. I've got Tim here with me. And Tim, how are we feeling?
Well, so far cool enough, so that's good. It is ridiculously hot, as I think everyone knows, and yeah, it's summer, man. It completely hits you and punches you in the face in Chicago.
Absolutely, DJ. Not in Chicago, in Florida, where it's like this all the time. So, how are you feeling?
What is winter?
It's a magical time. And when a mother and a father love each other very much. Anyway,
it's when all the Canadians start showing up by your house, DJ.
Yeah, it's when all the really old people from Chicago come down to where you are.
Yeah, the one thing I've realized when I was visiting up north, holy cow, the snowbirds do not get any better.
That is the truth, my man. That is the truth. But as we mentioned before, we are here. It's Sunday day recording. We're getting ready for some U.S. men's national team tonight. Exciting, meaningless Gold Cup matches. The United States men's national team has already advanced to the Gold Cup knockout round. I mentioned that to say two things. One, potentially game that doesn't actually have any standing on their tournament. Could we see Chris Brady in goal? We'll cross our fingers. And also to note that Chris Brady will be out through, at a minimum, the next two matches, unfortunately. So, hopefully for our sake, he's back before we start talking Open Cup again. But we know we will be without him this week, and we have Jeff Gall in goal. Few other short pieces of news that we'll talk to before we get to it. During the break here, Alex Calabrese put out a really awesome piece about the Chicago Fire 2018 Academy team and where they are today. Would highly recommend giving that a read. Tons of cool stuff from Alex there. And then we also have a stadium comparison piece coming out. It'll be live before the podcast actually goes up, but as I'm writing it, it's not. Tim, you want to give me a quick rundown on what you've kind of got there? Because I haven't actually seen it yet.
Yeah, it's just a look at how the Fire Stadium compares to some of the other new buildings in Major League Soccer. Not super in-depth or anything like that, because a lot of the details we don't know. But I think that putting it in context of like the stadium building boom that's happened is relevant. And I think gives people hopefully something to look forward to in terms of like, I know that the Fire are looking to kind of like pick and choose the best of everything that they can find from around MLS and around the world.
Absolutely. So basically, we're writing a whole story just to mog every other MLS club. Good job, Tim. I love it. That was for my Gen Zers out there. They'll know what that means. Anyway, we're going to keep it moving. Some reporting this week from DiMarzio. Claudio Cassano is nearing a loan deal to move to Serie B side Avellino. Obviously, some unrest. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Not a ton of details about what this deal would entail. I would imagine it's a loan to purchase, but obviously we don't quite know yet, Tim, unless you have any other information you want to share while we're here.
No, that's basically it. So I don't think it's a big surprise that, things hadn't exactly worked out the way that he had hoped, not being able to get a first team call up on account of the size of his deal. And I'm not sure that his agent had really taken the time to learn about MLS Next Pro and everything like that around from that, based on some things I've heard through the grapevine and stuff like that. So he, I think that what we've seen from Cassano is that he's got a lot of talent. Probably too much talent for MLS Next Pro. Not entirely clear that he has enough talent at this exact moment to be fitting into the first team roster in a depth chart place that would be friendly, especially with the Fire up against the cap. So this gives him an opportunity to go get minutes elsewhere, potentially move on from there, or potentially come back when he actually can make a clearer case for a first team contract in a way that he wasn't able to really not that long ago when he signed the MLS Next Pro deal.
Yeah, and I think that was, upon my hearing this, my hope in seeing that it was a loan deal was that, I think we've talked about before, we don't necessarily expect Brian Gutierrez to be here too much longer. There's obviously going to be some roster turnover this winter. Personally, the hope was, hey, we can go play for 6 months in Italy, keep getting minutes, keep growing, and then potentially before the start of the 26 season, come back and be a first team player, that would be really exciting because obviously they rated him highly, right? They paid a fee for him. They brought him in, even if it was to play with Fire too. So, cross the fingers that can end up working out as a positive for the first team, but we won't know until we get more details on the actual deal itself. As we mentioned,
and just to be clear, a second team, an MLS Next Pro sale does not help the Flyers cap situation in any way if it's a MLS Next Pro contract. So, yeah,
exactly. Thank you for reminding us there, Tim. A few more details here. Sam Rogers was back in training with the team at the end of last week. Carlos Turan at this point does not seem to be close to returning, and Christopher Kupp's dealing with a fracture. I would not expect to have any time soon, but we'll cross our fingers and wish him the best there. And then, as we mentioned before, Chris Brady will be out through at least Saturday as United States men's national team enters the knockout round. It could extend, I believe, all the way through the U.S. Open Cup quarterfinal. But again, we'll take that one game at a time, huh?
Yeah, I think that's what you got to do in a knockout competition, right?
Yeah. Okay, all right, Tim. A little cheeky here. Okay, you knew what I was saying.
No, I did, and
anyway.
It's kind of funny that it's true for both, right? Like it's true for both the U.S. Open Cup run that the Fire are hoping to be long and fruitful, and it's also true for the USMNT and the Gold Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. Although if recent performances are any indication, we may not have to wait too much longer. But hey, again, we're all rooting for it. Let's cross our fingers. We'll move on and actually talk about the game at hand, and that being Philadelphia Union coming into Chicago on Wednesday night. Top of the table, Philadelphia Union, actually first place both in the Eastern Conference and overall in MLS. They are on what some might call a bit of a tear, unbeaten in their last 12 games in all competitions. Their last loss coming April 12th. It was a 1-0 loss to New York City FC. They got the second best goal differential in MLS with 15, only second to Vancouver. They have the most wins, the most points in total, and they do also have the Golden Boot leader Ty Baribo, who they will unfortunately be without yet again. Ty having some injury issues, and then now is actually stuck in Israel with all of the fighting going on over there. So wishing him well, and he can get out safely soon. So it does seem they'll be down a touch. The other thing I'll point
as far as
quickly,
I know about Baribo, just a quick beat on that. He was called up for 2 friendlies with Israel,
yep.
And I don't think that it was injury that made him miss time with Philly, unless I'm mistaken. But yeah, big loss for them, and there's a remote chance from the time that we're recording that he could get back. He is scheduled to be on a flight. We don't know if that flight is still continuing as scheduled, and we don't know if a flight, which would be on Monday, would get him in time to where he would be ready to play on Wednesday.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a little bit up in the air there, as we said before, obviously. Wish him well. Hope he makes it back safely. But the other kind of interesting point here that we'll talk about, a lot of the guys who are going to be on the field, somebody who will not be on the field and will never be on the field, apparently, in a Philadelphia Union shirt. There were reports that came out yesterday, which was Saturday the 21st, that Thomas Mueller had actually approached Philadelphia Union and said he would like to be involved in the project. And they said, in no way are we paying you $10 million, take a hike. And so I tossed that in there, both as just a kind of a fascinating, I think, dichotomy of these two teams, right? We're going to talk a little bit about all the guys who are out for Philadelphia. And I guess we'll start there with some of the players that are likely to be missing. So Ty Baribo will be out. Quinn Sullivan will be out representing the United States men's national team. Nathan Harriel will join him. Andre Blake likely out as he's the goalkeeper for Jamaica, although he could be back. I believe Mikel Ure is still out. And then Donlé Jean-Jacques is still playing for Haiti as of now. He'll play against the United States men's national team tonight. And then kind of similar situation, we will see if he's available for Wednesday, although I doubt he goes. Certainly not a full 90, but even does 60 minutes. And Tim, I'll kind of toss to you to paint us a little bit of a picture on kind of what to expect from Philly and how you see these, this rash of missing players affecting their tactics come Wednesday.
So yeah, quick beat on Jamaica. They have not yet advanced out of the group. They would have to get more points than Guatemala, who faces Guadeloupe in their final game. They're currently 1 goal ahead in terms of goals for, both even on goal differential. But Jamaica's facing Panama, which is a tougher test than Guadeloupe. And it's, I don't know that it's the most likely that Jamaica emerges successful from that pair of matchups. But their game is on Tuesday evening. So could Andre Blake play for Jamaica on Tuesday and then be playing in Chicago for the Union on a Wednesday? Like, for a goalkeeper, is it out of the, realm of possibility? No. And I think that the game is at Q2 Stadium, so it's like, it's not like he's changing time zones or anything super crazy like that.
Mhm.
But it's still pretty unlikely that he would, even if the Jamaican national team is eliminated from the Gold Cup. But yeah, I mean, look, if Ty Baribo is unable to play for whatever reason, it's a huge loss to them. I mean, he has been like the engine of that team. I think not the engine per se, but he's been the finisher in that team. Like, no one else on the squad has more than 2 goals and he has 13. Which just goes to show, like, the Fire, I think, have a lot more secondary scoring possibilities and options than, it's like there have been days when Hugo Kuipers was kind of quiet and the Fire still managed to get, a lot of offense going one way or another. I don't know that it's necessarily the case that the Union will be able to do that, even though they're still on that unbeaten run.
Yeah, you mentioned Baribo, and they've scored. We mentioned this 12-game unbeaten streak they're on. They've still won, or excuse me, they have a draw and a win without Baribo since he left to join the Israeli national team, and averaging a goal a game there. They had a 0-0 draw against Dallas, and then a 2-1 victory over Charlotte. You kind of made the point before, according to him, like, a 2-1 victory over Charlotte isn't exactly the most convincing thing in the world. And I think the interesting thing when we're thinking about Philadelphia from that perspective is, like, they're kind of not. It goes back to the Thomas Miller point, right? It's, hey, here's Thomas Miller saying, I want to play for you. Can I join your team? Here's roughly what I'd like. And they just said, we're not even in the same ballpark. We're not even going to think about it for a designated player contract, something that doesn't matter against the cap. And it's this general money ballification of their roster, right? You look back at the trade of Jack, or the cash for of Jack McGlynn, a guy who everybody thought, what are you doing in making this sale? How are you actually going to improve your team? And I think at the beginning of the year, we all expected Philly to be taking a step back, and now they've seemingly gotten even better. But I say, like, they are not exactly a team of, they're not a top heavy team, right? I think said before, Tim, like, you look at the Fire, you're missing 1 or 2 guys, maybe just Philip Zinkernagel, and you look completely lost out there. You take away 3-4 guys from this Philadelphia Union team, and it just feels like they have somebody else ready to step up. They still have Indiana Vassilev going forward. They still have Bruno Damiani. Like, there are players who can take that spot. Obviously, they haven't really had to this point. And you still have a guy like Kai Wagner coming down the left, and you do just think, man, the way they control games, I think, puts you in for something no matter who they're missing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that part of it's the style that they play, right? And I think that one of the reasons that, former Chicago Fire legend, legend for forever, but like former Chicago Fire player, and legend, Jim Curtin had coached the team for, it seemed like ages, but I think was a little bit more than a decade, and was dismissed in the offseason. I think we were surprised because it was the first playoff miss that they had in a long time. And, the roster issues that you mentioned, where it's not really a high spending roster. And like, I think that like, you're right, John, like, we all expected them to take a step back. They took a step forward. And I think what it was is, Ernst Tanner announcing the dismissal, basically said that Jim Curtin wasn't playing the way that he thought that the team should be playing, that the team's philosophy is very much that, like, kind of like Red Bull energy style, like press, like kill them with the press, quick counter, balls through the channels, balls deep, like that kind of a system. And that's exactly what Bradley Carnell, who, was fired from St. Louis and did that in St. Louis, brought with him. And I think that that's the team. It's been the team's philosophy to play that way for a decade, from like the academy, which is one of the better academies in Major League Soccer, onwards. And so that's how you're able to get a bunch of guys that you haven't heard of that can seemingly do the job, because they have been living and breathing it in some cases, if they're academy kids or like former academy kids, like half their life, right? And I think that helps with having that certainty. Berhalter and his system are, like 6 months in to playing this way. And I think that just creates a different perception of depth. And the Red Bull system, I think you can get a lot of mileage out of not necessarily having the most technical players on the pitch, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think not to move out of order here, but I am going to move out of order here. Sorry, guys. But I think to your point there, Tim, that actually brings up kind of an interesting theme that we've had for the majority of the season, right? And that is kind of how the Fire are going to meet the challenge of Philadelphia. You know, with some of these issues we've had on the back line, hoping for a Sam Rogers return. When the Fire faced New York, right, New York Red Bull for reference, like lost 2-1. That was a Sam Rogers, Carlos Turan pairing on the back line. We've seen Omar Gonzalez start back-to-back games, and I think, to be candid, like I thought he performed better than I expected him to, but obviously it's still not up to the level of even a Sam Rogers, right? Certainly not over the course of 90 minutes. And you really kind of need a much stronger back line against against a Philadelphia Union team when you're starting a guy like Jeff Gall. So I guess kind of curious from your perspective, Tim. We still don't quite know what's going on with Sam Rogers. I expect we'll have a clearer picture tomorrow. Although I would expect him to be involved in some capability of how you see that playing out against Philadelphia specifically, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the upcoming games as well.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to be. I think that, at this point we kind of know Greg's pecking order and it's subject to change and stuff like that. But I think that he basically has the guys that he trusts to be in the starting 11. And if not, he's sort of like, he says that the thing that every coach in the history of the world has said about like next man up mentality and all that stuff. And that's what we've seen from Omar Gonzalez, but it's obviously there's a reason he wasn't ahead of him in the depth chart, right? And so, yeah. I think that like it's likely going to be Rogers. I think that you're right about that. I think it's got to be, we talked about this offline a little bit. It's going to have to be Jonathan Dean starting kind of against, Kai Wagner, going up the Philadelphia's left and the Fire's right side. That also, by the way, is going to put pressure on Andrew Gutman because although Wagner's the left back in their structure, he also takes corners on the other side of the pitch and, kind of like being in the right position on crosses and set pieces and stuff like that is something that I think that Gutman has had a few issues with and what has overall been a really strong season for him. So that's a lot, I think, for them to worry about. But like I said, not having a starting goalkeeper, so like both teams will be running with their backups. Andrew Rick, I have not been overly impressed with. I mean, at the same time, he is, in MLS, a more experienced goalkeeper now than Jeff Gall is. So, I mean, put that whatever you want to do with it.
Pretty high bar.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, look, Gall has played well, right? Like he's availed himself of the opportunity that he's had. But I'm really not 100% sure that without Ty Baribo in the lineup, that they really have someone that can finish if the Fire's center backs are locked in their game. Which I think the question is, if it's Rogers, how healthy will he be, and if it's Gonzalez, can he do it for 90 minutes or substantial fraction of 90 minutes at a time when it's going to be, hot and muggy and all of that stuff by Soldier Field.
Yeah, 100%. I think two things. First being, you mentioned that, kind of has to be Jonathan Dean. And I'm kind of with you 100%. Like it's obviously you're excited about what Leo Barroso offers going forward, but to your point in a game like this, like stifling any and all creativity and attacking prowess that Philadelphia can muster in the absence of Ty Baribo needs to kind of be step number one, because you will have opportunities against that back line if you're Hugo Kuipers and Philip Zinkernagel, who's returning, and Bamba and Gutierrez. So to see Jonathan Dean coming off, what I would call the best 4 games of his MLS career, I don't think that's like a stretch, right? I thought he looked pretty good against Nashville. He held Sam Surge well. Hani Mukhtar tends to play more on the right, so not a ton of matchups there for him, but that'll be kind of his big task for the week of you kind of need to be the guy responsible for this. And then also, and actually, we didn't talk about it, I think, on the recap, but kind of curious, we only saw 45 minutes out of Mauricio Pineda after serving a suspension. It wasn't like he was injured for a week. So I'm kind of curious to see what kind of shape he comes out in. I didn't think he played poorly in the first half. But, could the tides be changing slightly of maybe we'll see a move to a Kellen Acosta in that starting 11? Maybe we'll see more of Mauricio Pineda. Maybe we'll start to see less. that'll
Yeah,
be
and
kind of an
Kwame, by the way,
interesting
looks like he's
perspective.
still out for the time being, so that would have been
Yeah.
the other option there, but is not likely for this one unless something unexpected changes.
Yeah. I would expect earliest back for him, and I'm making purely out of the reporting on Friday again from our good friend Joe Chance, who said he was working out separately indoors. I would expect we'd maybe see him somewhere closer to the 5th than the 28th. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's all that to say, I think there's some interesting kind of decisions in the lineup there for Greg, which is, and that brings us kind of to our original point, which is we are in the midst of, I mean, DJ, you're our like random stats guy. One of the worst home stretches for Chicago Fire ever. I mean, was
I
it one
don't-
draw, one wins, 5 losses? Like that's in this season.
I don't think so. I think the Fire were still worse back in 2015, I want to say. But it's definitely not the best. I don't think this is a home stretch that really is at all definable historically, because it's like, usually if you're bad at home, you're really bad on the road. But you can't define that this year because Fire are bad at home, but they're good on it. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this is a season that's on crack.
Yeah, I mean, bad at home, good on the road is very unusual in Major League Soccer. And also, like the Fire, like they have been dropping points at home, and they've not won games that they wanted to win, that they thought were winnable, at least on paper, before the game was, before the game was played. Although it's, I think that we've seen Berhalter sort of revise his assessment of games, in the rearview mirror. Where the first game against DC, the Fire's home opener, they were up 2-1. They ended up with a draw. He said after the game he felt like it was a 2 points snatched away, and then talking about it to us last week, he said it felt like it was a point that the Fire didn't deserve to get because they didn't play to win, which like they deserve to win, which I think is also fair. But it's not like the Fire have been terrible at home. Like we are still just like 3 home losses now, right? No, 2 home losses. The one against Nashville.
And then
FC
the one against
Cincinnati. Yeah, and that's it. And so like the other performances have been, a win and then draws, including a draw against Orlando that I think was pretty impressive, the one against Miami that we've talked about. So like it's not like it's been all doom and gloom and like the team has played terribly, but at the same time it is a data point, and it does feel like the team doesn't come out with the same energy at home, and like that's highly subjective and everything else, but who knows what that is. And it got to the point where initially when we asked Greg about it, he almost is sort of like kind of poo-pooed the idea that it was a thing that we should be worried about, because he's like, look, we want to try to win every game home or on the road. But I think now after 7 home games and 1 victory, it's gotten to the point of like, okay, it's hard to just put it sweep it under the rug like that.
Yeah, and that's also, I mean, if we're being honest here, with all due respect to Greg Berhalter, like that's coach speak, right? That's, hey, every game matters. Like, yeah, every game matters, but it feels a little bit different when you lose on the road versus when you lose at home. I think especially in a league like MLS where like there is a lot of parity, right? That home advantage like can make a big difference for some of these places. And I think it's probably a bit demoralizing, right? When you're playing on your home turf and you can't get wins. And so that kind of, the larger point of this game, right, is it kicks off this, 2 home games inside of 4 days. Philadelphia, the tougher matchup of the 2, but Charlotte still has the ability to win games. They can score goals. The Fire will likely be the more shorthanded team there, if I'm remembering Charlotte's roster correctly. And it kind of brings you into this game with almost a little bit of a stronger sense of, man, this feels like a very winnable game. To your point, Tim, missing Ty Baribo, missing a lot of the threatening pieces that they have and a lot of their strength, right, in their midfield, in their back line. And it feels like something you need to be taking advantage of when you've got, the entire front half of your attack in-house, right? Everybody's here. It's kind of like we talked about against DC, right? It's like you might have to win this game 5-4, but you should be winning this game. Right? And for a lot of credit to Philadelphia. They're a really well-run organization and obviously a very deep team, but there does seem to be the opportunity here for the Fire to steal 3 points off the top team in the league.
Yeah, I don't even think it's really stealing, again, just given the absences and given, who they've got that's missing. But at the same time, they're a I mean, again, like they know how they're going to play, right? And like they've had it drilled into everyone on the team. It's a fairly simple way to play, and it's a way that can punish teams that aren't really doing a great job reading the pressing cues and being able to play out of it, which has been an issue for the Fire off and on all season. And so I think that part of the matchup's interesting. And the other thing you mentioned, the Open Cup game, which I think we're all sort of increasingly aware is coming up soon. Minnesota plays in a not exactly the same system or the same way, but it's just, there's a lot of similarities between the way that the two teams play. And I think that being able to put together a strong performance and get a result and, hopefully a win against the Philadelphia Union, again, even missing their talisman in Ty Baribo, would probably give the Fire confidence going into that game in Minnesota of like, okay, we know how to get results against teams that are going to come at us this way. And just one quick thing on Charlotte, they will be without Tim Ream, who, I think has been a huge part of like the defensive stability that they've had, even though their defense hasn't been as good as I think everyone expected it to be this year. So, absence is everywhere. It just is the way that the, international cookie crumbles when you're, domestic league plays through a tournament that's also happening on your home soil. But hey.
Yeah. Two things. One, did Tim just inadvertently give Ty Baribo like the best nickname? Like call him the talisman? Like that's I don't know, man. If you're a Philadelphia Union fan and you heard that, I would highly recommend stealing it because that's good. You don't get those often. Kind of like King John Dean.
I mean, it's been a long time, but MLS like in the late 90s had some TV ads where they gave guys like wrestling nickname style things like the Destroyer. So, Ty the Talisman Baribo is, I think it fits in that sort of canon.
100%. I like that. Get little necklaces. You know what? I'm not going to keep giving you guys ideas. You can do what you want.
But
with what Tim
But like one other interesting matchup, I know that you talked about Jonathan Dean and how important it is that he play. I think that depending on how the game is going, it would also potentially be a game where, depending on exactly how they line up and if Kai Wagner is going the full 90, which I'd expect him to, depending on game state and all of that stuff. But it wouldn't be entirely crazy if we did see potentially Barroso coming on for Gutman, depending on how the game has been going at some point. Especially because they are on their, depending on how you count, like second or third string right back in Olivier Mbaizo. So he's been decent in the games that he's had. He has not looked like Nathan Harriel, who's currently with USMNT. It's a drop off, right? And I think that we've seen Barroso's skill set when he's able to get some room and go forward, even though that's not normally room that Philly will give you.
Yeah. I think there's also maybe an interesting conversation, and I'm kind of thinking of this on the fly, so I apologize. I'm giving you something random here, but I think there's also a potentially interesting conversation there of like, this is a game, to your point there, Tim, of like Andrew Gutman should be able to cook a little bit, right? And to that end, do you maybe look at, we talked a lot about some of Jonathan Bamba's struggles, but not removing Jonathan Bamba from the equation, but potentially moving Philip Zinkernagel back inside as he's returning from his well-deserved wedding break. And moving Marin Haile Selassie out to the right, maybe starting Brian Gutierrez off the bench to give Andrew Gutman, to essentially create a little bit more gravity towards the center of the field to give Andrew Gutman a little bit more space to work. And then kind of moving back to that more 4-2-3-1 that we saw against DC, where you're giving maybe Omar Gonzalez or even a slightly not 100% Sam Rogers a little more help defensively, maybe with an Acosta Pineda pairing as opposed to Sergio Orhel. I don't hate that idea, right? And to that end, like I wouldn't even mind, as much as I do like Leonardo Barroso, if Jonathan Dean's not going a full 90, I wouldn't mind seeing Omari Glasgow. I think in terms of his defensive floor, it feels a little crazy to say, but I like what he's offered there a little bit more than Leonardo Barroso as a late game defensive sub, as opposed to when you're chasing a goal or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that it'll be interesting to see how where the Fire tried to choose to get forward against the Union, right? Because like we talked like Wagner's good on both sides of the ball. I think that the Fire shouldn't give up trying to play a little bit through Dean every now and again, but I don't think it's going to be like the primary pattern of attack. And one of the issues that Charlotte had against the Union was like they had some possession in the midfield up to about like the middle of the pitch, and then it just stopped. Like it's like they were afraid to cross that line almost with the ball. Not that they were afraid to, but I mean, as soon as they tried to, the Union were on them and would dispossess them of the ball. So the center of the pitch in Philly's half was basically all Philly's, area of control. And I think that is something that if the Fire are able to do more than Charlotte were, which I think that they're a better team with those midfield options that you talked about, that potentially gives them a more interesting attack and lets them do some of the things that Charlotte was not able to do against essentially the same lineup, right? Like the same players were out as are, going to be out for this one.
Alrighty, and that brings us to our last kind of topic here, which is that this is actually the start of a stretch of 24 days in which the Fire will play 7 times. It's 6 league matches, 4 of which will be against Eastern Conference opponents, and then the U.S. Open Cup quarterfinal at Minnesota. We've talked a lot about kind of the depth of the Fire and how they've been tested this year, but I think in the more narrow context of what this week looks like heading into Philadelphia and Charlotte, it gives you the opportunity for the 5th at Cincinnati. If you can get 6 points here, 4 points, 6 points, ideally 6 points, it puts you in a much better position to, although Greg doesn't like to, give your main guys a touch of rest so that they are fresh to go in that quarterfinal matchup against Minnesota. And we won't think, I guess, too broadly about what this stretch of games means as we head into the summer window. But Tim, as we kind of stand at the onset, what is your what kind of springs to mind for you in terms of how it relates to the team?
I mean, look, it's a big week, right? Like the Fire currently are on one hand on track to be 20 points better than they were last season, just mathematically. And on the other hand, they're not in a playoff position or a postseason position right now. So like that just shows the depth of nobody realized that the East would be like this insane and this much of a murderer's row, right? Like the Fire could legitimately add 20 points to their 2024 point total and still miss the postseason, which would be a huge improvement, but also it wouldn't feel like an improvement to a lot of people. And I think that, so, on some level, right? Like, I think it's like, okay, there's 17 games left with the Fire. Like, it's not quite at a point of like counting points. At the same time, you need to take advantage of every opportunity you've got. This would be a good time to turn around that home form. And I think that it's a huge week, right? Like, it's the first thing that we've done like a back-to-back, midweek Saturday MLS stand for the Fire this season. And I think that it'll be really interesting to see. I think that the confidence the team has going into Cincinnati, which is another really huge matchup, and then on forwards, is maybe a bigger factor than just the number of points, right? Like if they get results that feel like good results, whatever they are, whether it's 3 points, 4 points, or whatever, I think that gives the team momentum to have a good game against one of the top teams in the league in Cincinnati, and then spring that into the Open Cup, and then off to their continue a July after that.
Yeah, I think we mentioned before the idea of this is a winnable game, right? Given everybody that Philadelphia has out, I think you look at this almost in the context of like the way you're speaking, Tim, about you want to carry good results into that quarterfinal game to kind of continue the trend. I think how do I phrase? The game against Philadelphia is a 3-point game. It's just 3 points. The game against Charlotte is 6 points, right? You're taking away from them. You're adding to you. To walk out of Soldier Field Saturday without having won that game would be huge given the playoff standing. It's the last time you play Charlotte for the year. They are likely 2 teams that are going to be fairly close to each other in the layout of the table as we get to decision day. So to have 2 wins over them, I think would be massively helpful, as opposed to even going 4 points instead of 6, right? And God forbid you lose that game. I think it would leave a really poor taste in your mouth going into one of the tougher tests in MLS, which is away at Cincinnati. So I feel like Wednesday is setting the foundation of we're back into our groove. We're working into this you go into Saturday with the good feeling you can beat that Charlotte team like you did last time, as we've seen, and carrying that into Cincinnati and then hopefully into Minnesota as well. Whether Greg chooses to openly prioritize that by rotating players or not. I think, to your point, Tim, I think it might even be a little more micro than just carrying good into that Minnesota game. I think you need that game Saturday almost a little bit more than you need the one Wednesday. Although you kind of need them all at this time of year, I suppose.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that the Fire were traditionally not good at. Is this is also a time of year when it's hot, and some teams are kind of like, it's a long season. We sort of know what kind of team we are, and so there's, I mean, and former players have talked about this. You'll never get a current player talking about it, but they're like, yeah, we kind of like didn't really give it 100% in that middle part of the season because it's like you got some points on the board. There's still a lot of games to play. And like, you don't necessarily know is that even though mathematically in your head, you're like 1 point or 2 points or 3 points could be like whatever, like that home playoff spot. It could be in the playoffs at all, like whatever those things are. You don't necessarily actually play like it game in, game out, especially with the Heat and everything else. And if the Fire can be one of those teams that is locked in and focused, which is something that they've been able to do some years, right? Like we saw that in 2023, where they were getting a bunch of teams, I think, a bunch of points against teams that were not 100% locked in the summer. That I think just like those points count the same at the end of the year. And I think for the Fire who are trying to establish an identity still, or really get it more deeply ingrained and feel who they are rather than just kind of like know in their head who they're supposed to be, I think that could be huge.
Fully agree. I'm right there with you. That'll kind of be as good a place as any to wrap things. But before we go, as always, we ask the most important question of the episode. DJ, I'm going to start with you on this one. Who you got?
2-2 draw.
2-2
I'm just
draw.
going to say 2-2 draw with probably Aneda and Gutman scoring.
Huh. Interesting.
Probably, he says probably, and then it's like the most off the wall combination.
I mean,
Tim, who do you?
It makes sense to go off the wall a bit.
Yeah, fair play. 2 goals from range, perhaps. Maybe a couple of long ones that would make sense. Tim, who you got?
Yeah. So I'm going to say 2-1 for the Fire. Again, like I don't think that the Union, just with, especially without Ty Baribo in the lineup, have more than 1 or 2 goals in them, no matter what. I think the Fire have 2 in them. So 2-1. I'm going to say Bamba and let's say Kuipers. I think that it's time for him to get back on the scoring sheet. And, doing it against the team that has the current Golden Boot leader, even if he's not in the lineup, I think has some nice poetry to it.
Yeah, 100%. I've got 2-0 Fire. I think, I spent the whole time talking about how they're still dangerous, but like I think you look at the one not big threat, but the one major threat that they have right now being Kai Wagner. I know I'm, my reputation precedes me when it comes to Jonathan Dean, but I think his defensive work rate lately has been maybe better than we're giving it credit for. I think, Tim, you alluded to it when we were talking a little bit before we got on of like, is the best American left back available, other than Anthony Robinson, of course, with the U.S. men's national team right now? Certainly not the best American left back in MLS, because that would be Andrew Gutman. I just think there's a real chance that kind of the fullback play ends up being pivotal in this. Andrew Gutman going forward, Jonathan Dean in defense. And I think the Fire end up, 2-0 victory. I like Hugo Kuipers' brace. I think he's hungry, and I think he sees this as a game where he gets to announce himself a little bit, maybe against top team in the league, even if they are missing a few guys. So yeah, the Fire 2-0. Fellas, anything else we want to add before we say our farewells? All right, perfect. I was waiting for somebody to say something there, and you both just shake your head. It's perfect.
I mean, we can just start talking about random autism things. For example, the stadium.
That's going to be on that. That's going to be on the B. That's going to be on the B pod that we don't actually have.
I'm sorry, you just call Hot Takes a B pod? Is that what I just heard?
No, I was saying like that as if we had a B pod, which obviously we have 2 pods that are both everyone's favorite. Just like kids, you love them all equally.
Yes.
We have another podcast?
We all love our children. All right. you're in the chat every time. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Last few little things I'll remind you, as always. You can keep in touch, as always, on menandred97.com. It's where you'll find all the wonderful reporting from Tim, Alex, Max. I've got some things on there as well. Most notably, Alex, with that really wonderful piece about the 2018 Chicago Fire Academy and where they are today. And Tim's new piece coming out about the stadium comparisons around MLS, comparing the station with the other soccer-specific stadiums in MLS at the moment. So would highly recommend checking out the site, giving both of those a look. And then if you haven't, and you're still really excited about the stadium or about our game against Nashville, one more final shout out to our friends David Goss and Ben Wright, who joined us for some specialty episodes. Would highly recommend listening to those. And as always, you can follow us on social media. That's Twitter, Instagram, all the main ones, Men of Red 97, or on Twitter, you can also find MIR97 Pods, where you can stay up to date with all things us and what we do and all the content that we're putting out. But as always, thank you so much for listening. You can like, rate, subscribe, smash that mother frickin' subscribe button with a hammer. That would be great. We would certainly appreciate it. Rate us 5 stars if you're on Apple, whatever. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for joining us around the bonfire. And come on, you Men in Red.